This is my Porsche Sports Exhaust. Well, actually it's the tips, and they're filthy, but ignore that. It's been a bit sickly of late, but the time's finally arrived to get that sorted. Welcome back to the channel and a very dirty 981 Boxster GTS. Now, my GTS has got the Porsche Sports Exhaust system, came in standard on the GTS spec, and despite appearances, it's never quite worked perfectly since the day I bought the car, and the reason for that is a sticky valve, which we'll go into. So in this video I'm going to just take you through why my exhaust doesn't work, what PSE actually is, kind of how it should be working, and why I've decided to replace the PSE with a brand new PSE. Let's get stuck in. That's filming, so we should be able to pop that under there. So this is the business end of the Sports Exhaust, PSE, Porsche Sports Exhaust. This is the right hand rear silencer, and this is where the magic happens. This side's working, and this is the actuator rod. The actuator's here. There's a valve, a vacuum I should say, a vacuum line, braided vacuum line from the engine here. Little lever, and inside here is the butterfly valve that lets the air pass through this section, which bypasses part of the exhaust, which makes the exhaust louder, which is what we like to hear. This is fine. Basically, when the actuator is down or out, we call that open. The valve is open, the sports exhaust makes more noise. And when you start the car, what happens is momentarily after the engine starts, some vacuum is created, and the vacuum draws this rod up into the body of the actuator, rotating the arm and closing the valve. So when you start the car, other than a brief moment after you initially turn the ignition, the valve is closed. And when you press the sports exhaust button, the vacuum is released, the actuator comes down, excuse the fluid coming off it, just started the engine, so it's just got a bit of moisture, and the valve is open. So what you're looking for is a nice, clean, easy action on the actuator to tell you that basically the exhaust is working. Let's now have a look at the other side. Now this, on the other hand, is the other side, the near side left. Same basic setup, just mirrored, and all appears to be fine. We have the same actuator, rod, body, valve, lever. The trouble with this side is it's sticky and it's a bit loose at the moment, so it does go in and out, but it's definitely a bit unhappy. And if I was to pretend I was the vacuum line and suck it in, therein lies the problem, because that isn't me ramming it in the hole, that's me demonstrating what happens when it gets pulled in, but it doesn't come out of its own accord. That shouldn't stay up inside there. So what happens is repeatedly over a drive, that'll just get pulled up and get stuck in there, which means that the sports exhaust effectively doesn't work on this side of the car. So that is what's being replaced. Kind of looks like it's okay, doesn't it? But take my word for it, it's not. This is very definitely an intermittent stroke long-term fault, which we're going to solve. So before we talk about replacing PSE, let's actually try and get our heads around what it looks like on the Boxster, how it all works, and what actually needs to be done to it. So I bought my car from Harbour Cars. They're based down in Chichester. Well established, very friendly chaps, and great to deal with. And when I put the car up on the ramp as part of my collection day, we spotted that there was a slightly sticky PSE valve. So that was something to keep an eye on. And as it turned out, it never got unsticky, and that's how we got to this point of needing to replace it. But let's just have a quick look at what that means in practice. Now, it's quite hard to photograph and film underneath the car, so I'm going to use some still shots here. And I want to just take you through how it all works, what it looks like, in case you've not done this before, or in case you're interested in understanding how the exhaust system works on a GTS. So here's my car on the ramp, and you can see it's fairly straightforward. twin exhaust tips at the back, some obvious big silencers, and you can spot the rear wheels because they're big and fairly prominent in the shot. Let's have a look at another angle, going slightly more underneath the car, and again you can see the two main silencers of the exhaust system. There's some stiffening plates underneath that lower down in the shot, the rear wheels with the various suspension arms. You can spot the anti-roll bar and so on and so forth. Now let's just remind ourselves that the Boxster is mid-engined, and the red line shows effectively the rear axle. Now of course there's not actually a rear axle, it's independent rear suspension, and what that line effectively passes through the centre of the hubs of each wheel to give us our sort of sense of where the rear axle should be if we had a cart sprung car. And then you can see roughly where the sump is, that's the blue triangle, and then above that, which is to say towards the rear of the car, just peeking out, if you look really closely underneath the stiffening plate, is the gearbox. Now the exhaust system on the GTS, and in fact on any Boxster, and indeed any Cayman of that era, the 981, effectively has two independent sides, so a left and a right, an offside or an near side, whichever way up or down you're looking at the car, and it's split into two. And we can see it's fairly obvious actually when you look at the underside of the car how it all works. It's a relatively simple setup. You've got three collectors on the manifold from the engine. That's the green line, and that passes through a catalytic converter and then up and over the rear axle into the silencer unit for that side of the car, out of that and then up into an exhaust tip. And if we look at the next shot, we can see where the Porsche Sports Exhaust valving is. So that silencer is a PSE silencer, and it has the two little valves, left hand side, right hand side, in the green circles. So let's have a little look at that more closely. Just a close-up shot of that same thing, and it's fairly obvious when we zoom in a little bit more where the manifolds are. Now I don't actually know. I don't think they're equal length. I'm sure somebody wiser will tell me in the comments. I think they look like they're unequal length, which is not, as I understand it, optimum. But there we go. It doesn't matter. It's not a racing car. It's then those pass in fairly short order into the catalytic converter, which then passes into some tubing. The main exhaust run up and over with the heat shield over the axle, as I say, and then back through that silencer, and we can see the PSE valve there to the tips. Now the tips are actually where the system stops being separate and joins up. Close up there showing you the how the tips are mounted to the left and right sides of each silencer. The exhaust gas meets in the middle, comes out the tips, makes a fantastic sound. Something clever happens with the gas flow in the middle there, which I dare say has some benefit to it, although some aftermarket systems do seem to separate that, and off it goes again. So if we remind ourselves where that PSE valve is, around in the red there, now that's actually showing the right hand side of my car. So that's the offside in the UK, right hand side in any country. And let's look at that valve, a still photo of that valve. We saw this earlier on. Here it is. So the actuator is out, which means the valve is open, which means the sports exhaust is engaged or turned on. Now the same one on the left hand side of the car, you can see, just taking a photo of it as you come to it, it's stuck in. That means it doesn't work, as we saw earlier, and that's the problem we're trying to correct. So just a quick reminder, we've got two separate sides, if you will, two sides, and they are separate. In essence, those tips can be removed, so leaving two separate PSE sections to the system on the 981. And if you look really closely, you'll also spot that, circled in yellow, that there are two joins just peering out between the axle or the suspension arms. Two joins. In this car, they are double bolted heads with a gasket, and that's joins the rear section or front, which we're upside down, aren't we? So effectively that's the join between the section that comprises the manifold and the catalytic converter, and then the section behind that, which is principally the silencer. So actually in the round we have four discrete sections to the exhaust, and whether you have a sports exhaust or standard exhaust, that is how it works. And in this slightly low resolution shot, which I've taken from the Boxster manual, the Boxster showroom brochure. You can see sort of the whole system plumbed into the engine, the gearbox sitting aft to the rear of the engine, and then this little kink in the exhaust run where it lifts over the axle, and there it all is, laid out nice and cleanly. So at this point, indulge me if you will, I'm going to talk briefly about another PSE system on a car I previously owned. Now, if you've scrolled to the bottom of my video list, you'll realise that I also previously owned a 911. In fact, it was a 997 Gen 2. If you know what one of those is, it was a model year 2011, give or take, and was a Carrera 2S manual. So here's the underside of that car. Different garage, different ramp, but you'll be familiar with some of those elements. And it was a manual, so you can see that we've got an engine sump, which looks remarkably similar to the one in the Boxster because it's basically the same engine. And behind that in the photograph is sort of the triangle is the gearbox, my car being, as I said, a manual. Now, it's famously rear engine, the 911, and if we just remind ourselves where the rear axle is, you can see that there's, obviously the wheels are off in this photograph, there's an awful lot of engineering going on behind the rear axle, which is to say towards the top of this photograph. The gearbox, of course, the half shaft and the gearbox running left and right out to the rear hubs. So we've got the entire engine and, in this instance, the entire Porsche Sports Exhaust stuffed into that gap behind the engine and the back of the car. As a consequence of that, in this car, 997, the sports exhaust, in fact, frankly, any exhaust system, the standard exhaust system too, is far more compact and convoluted. And if you can follow that green line, you'll see it doubles back on itself in and out quite a lot. So 3 exits from the manifold, flat 6 obviously, 3 on each side. So 3 out of that, straight into the catalytic converter, straight out of that into the large central silencer, which actually appears to be a single unit, has a return in it, which is independent. So into that, straight out of it, unseen behind the tips, back into a secondary silencer, through that silencer, and then back out again into the tips, and then exhausted to the back of the car. And it's hidden away behind the tips and that piece of metalwork that comprises the base of the tips, where the red circle is the PSE valve on the 997. So here's a side view of my car. During some winter maintenance, the wheel is off. Well done for spotting that. And you can just see the side of the secondary silencer. And if we look at the part, here it is, grabbed from the Design 911 website, thank you folks. The sports exhaust valve is actually just behind the back of that plumbing, but it's a complicated part, and that's partly because it's got to fit up inside that back bit of the wheel well around the side of the engine. Anyway, the PSE valve is in there, and the valving works in roughly the same way as it does on the Boxster. Now, one final little bit here. On my car, found that the engine tone, even with the PSE on, was good but not great. And one of the oft undertaken aftermarket modifications is to remove the centre silencer. Now that central silencer, as we've just spotted, doesn't have anything to do with PSE, doesn't have anything to do with the catalytic converter. So removing it doesn't affect PSE and doesn't affect emissions for, in the UK, the MOT test. So I took mine off and I bought a Hayward and Scott bypass, and I plumbed that in, and it looked very smart. And it just added back a little bit of the fruitiness that was perhaps missing from the Gen 2 engine, the DFI engine, which people, and I think I agree with this, lamented passing from the Gen 1 engines, which did definitely sound a little bit nicer. So I ended up with a bypass centre exhaust. You can see the catalytic converter is nice and clearly there. And actually, if you're really on it, you'll spot those are GTS tips, which indeed they are. I replaced my standard S tips with those too. So there we go. That is another PSE system, slightly more complicated in the way it's plumbed in, but basically working in the same way. When I got the Boxster home, having driven it back from Harbour Cars, I was really excited, but also just slightly frustrated that the sports exhaust wasn't quite working properly. Now, if you didn't know, you wouldn't really know, because actually one bank working, in my case, the right-hand bank, it made a fantastic sound and the car still sounded awesome under load and just cruising along generally, but I knew that the left-hand side wasn't working. Now, I'd also read that some mechanics, some OPCs have advised against running with PSE on when one side isn't working, because it creates a differential back pressure. In other words, the gas pressure exiting the exhaust is different, and that might trigger some problems with the ECU and the like. Now, I have no idea whether that's true or not, but I'm a kind of chap who doesn't like to take risks. So I generally haven't been running with PSE turned on. I've left both the actuators sucked in by the vacuum, which means the valves are closed, which means the engine is pushing against equal resistance on both banks. So at the time, I was really keen to try and get the car back to how it should be. And I did look at aftermarket alternatives. And the reason I did that is because at the time of buying the car, which was late summer 2023, the PSE parts had been effectively taken out of stock across Europe. You couldn't get them. You could not buy, order, or get your hands on a replacement PSE silencer for a Boxster 981 and possibly other models too. And this was effectively due, as I've now understood, to supply chain issues related to the war in Ukraine. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but certainly you could not get hold of PSE. So I looked at other models from different manufacturers. I looked at some stuff from Fabspeed. I looked at some stuff from Seoul. There's a company in the UK called, slightly confusingly, Top Gear, and they make replacement bits. And all those had advocates and favourable reviews, but they also run the risk of being, ironically, a little bit louder than the PSE, and also potentially introducing the dreaded drone being a slightly unpleasant harmonic at a constant engine and road speed, which it's not too much fun to listen to if you're on a motorway, for example. Now, as I ran the car through the remainder of autumn last year, I just realised that the sound the PSE makes, even when only one side's working, is really good. In fact, I didn't really think I needed any more than that. I didn't particularly want it to be louder. It had a fantastic tone, how it sounded, all the different layers of volume and richness. It was just great. And if you've watched videos on YouTube, funnily enough, you'll have gathered that too. If you've got a car, then you'll know what I'm talking about. And actually, I think even the standard exhaust on a standard Boxster sounds pretty awesome. So I realised I didn't really need to replace it with an aftermarket version. I just needed to wait for the PSE part to come back into stock. And so I did. And it did eventually. And that's what brings us up to date. I got the call from Harbour Cars in March saying, Christian, great news. We've got a PSE system in. I said, can you give me both sides? They said, yes. Sorted. Let's get the car down. Let's get it fitted. And that brings us up to date. So back to the Boxster and back to Harbour Cars in Chichester. So we agreed that the exhaust was going to be replaced. In fact, what we actually agreed, because as I described a moment ago, only one side wasn't working, was that the left-hand silencer section, which includes the PSE valving, would be replaced, because the left-hand manifold and catalytic converter, and the same on the right and the silencer on the right, were all working perfectly well. Now, my car's done 50,000, 51,000 miles, and I thought, well, you know what, to be honest, that PSE valve on the right it's had a good run. Be a shame to have to get the car back up on the ramp again in the future to change that. So I thought, right, I'll bite the bullet, and I decided and agreed with the guys at Harbour Cars that we would actually replace both of the back sections, partly under warranty and partly by me putting my hand in my pocket. So here's a view of the car before. That's the earlier shot, which you've seen already. And here, slightly different angle, but basically the same view, is the new system in place. So nice and shiny, properly installed, all went in really nicely, and we took time and care to align the tips left to right, up and down within that aperture on the rear valance. And lo and behold, two new, hidden away in there, shown by the green circles, two new PSE actuators, valves, rods, butterfly valves, and the like. And we also took the opportunity to do what everyone suggests you should do when you put a new exhaust sections on, which is to obviously put a new gasket on that central section. So you can see here, this is where the collector and the catalytic converter joins to the silencer section. So in effect, this is where the cat back bit starts. So stainless steel bolts on there, a new gasket. You can see those bolts here. The original factory ones tend to turn chocolate, and here we have two lovely new silencers, one on the left, one on the right, with the requisite actuator for the sports exhaust. So all well and good and looking rather lovely and new. Now the sports exhaust doesn't itself come with new tips. My tips were fine. They looked a little bit worn, a little bit corroded, but they were basically mechanically sound. And happily, the guys at Harbour Cars, in fact, Auto Technics, who do their work for them next door, also popped a couple of new stainless steel straps and bolts on there too for me. So we ended up with a lovely new PSE catback system, so left and right, with PSE valves, actuators, all the gubbins, back on the car, everything tightened up, everything that should be stainless steel now stainless steel, looking super smart, and as you'll hopefully find in an upcoming video, sounding rather fine. So that is how the PSE system is plumbed in on the Boxster. Let's go and look at those valves working in real time now. Right, I'm going in, let's have a look. I'm using the front-facing camera on my phone, and there it is. So that is the new PSE, and in fact it's on a couple of 100 miles now. Bit grubby, a bit of heat through the system, taking the shine off it, which is what we'd expect. But crucially, that's just working really nicely. I can feel that's nice and sharp. It's hitting the stop, it's coming back. There's nice free movement. So that is looking good on this side. This is the side that actually was previously working. So in effect, we haven't solved the problem here. We've just put a new part on to give the same performance. Let's go and look at the other side. And this is the near side. There we go. Let's pop that underneath. And funnily enough, much the same story. It is looking new and it's working flawlessly. So that's great. There we go. Two new PSE valves, one on both sides. All very much in order. So there we go. We have a new PSE catback system installed on the car. Everything's working. I'm really happy with the job the Harbour Cars and Auto Technics did. I guess in effect it's only really made the car as it was from new delivered to the first owner, but for me it's just resolved that little niggling error that has existed since I bought the car. I'm really chuffed with the way it's gone. It's sounding, as you'll hear in the next video, superb, and yeah, jobs are good. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Thank you for indulging me in a deeper dive. If you've got any questions or comments, do stick them below. Otherwise, a like or a thumbs up would be welcome. And if you've enjoyed this as part of my series, do consider subscribing to the channel too. Otherwise, thanks again once more. See you next time.